Hey everybody, Ryan Ballingy back here with Pete Weber on our third episode of Gear Effects. Happy to have you with us, whether you're listening on your podcast service of choice, whether you're watching us on YouTube or Golf News Net. Happy to have you. Pete, we're going to talk this week a little bit about turf interaction. We're going to talk a little bit about the kind of golfer you are, whether you're a picker or you're a digger, and the types of grass that you play on, whether you're playing on rye or bent up here kind of in the Northeast like we play on, whether you're playing dominant Bermuda, whether you see some Pass Pala maybe in your life. Maybe you're the rare fescue player in the United States, one of those types of folks. But there's lots of different types of grasses out there, lots of different types of golfers. And all those things kind of have to be married together and to be fit for the proper types of equipment that you need to play. So inspiration for this was Hideki Matsuyama winning the Masters, playing on a big overseed at Augusta National that was completely different almost in every way from what they played in November, because they had dominant Bermuda then, and then they bring in the oversea with bent and Zoysia, and they bring all that together for the April Masters. Looks completely as we expect, green and beautiful and all that stuff. But they are very different grasses, and they have very different demands for golfers. So you're down in Atlanta. I assume almost all the grass that you're playing on is Bermuda, but is that true for most of the golfers you're fitting? Is they're Bermuda players and they're not thinking about playing on different types of grass?
Yeah, I would say that, obviously here in the Southeast, there's Bermuda, there's, obviously there's some Zoysia as well. Some different areas. Obviously you get down into like the Gulf Coast area, there's some different grasses there as well. You do still see a mix of different turfs on greens, like Cartersville Country Club where I'm at, we happen to be bent grass. You still see a lot of Bermuda, obviously. Champion Bermuda is probably one of the more popular ones a lot of people go to right now.
Yeah.
But you do see a mix of it. So it starts to present some different things to look at as far as, how do the clubs interact with the ground. I would probably in general say probably plays a little bit more of the role in sometimes what I'm doing wedge-wise for the player. But then again, sometimes it's there's some things irons-wise we want to consider with that as well. In general, obviously, I grew up in Iowa, Midwest, got a lot of Poana, bent grass, Kentucky bluegrass in the rough. So there's things to consider there. Obviously, the divots are usually a little bit bigger on those type of turfs. So someone who can feel like they're a really shallow golfer here, not maybe just brushing the top of the grass. They get up north and they can think they're a digger sometimes.
Yep.
But it varies. You try to do your best as far as, okay, what's the predominant surface they're going to play on? How can you help them if you know that they're going to be traveling around playing different turf? And sometimes it's just an understanding, okay, just like through TrackMan data to sit there and say, okay, what do we know is likely to happen in Bermuda conditions? What do we know are some possibilities that could happen in different types of turf? You start throwing ryegrass overseed into the mix on things. It seems like there's more moisture that comes off the grass that ends up on the golf club, so it could get between the ball and the club face. So we talked about that the other night when we were just kind of briefly talking about some of the things we saw happen at Augusta, where a couple shots got airmailed over greens, or all of a sudden it flew just a little bit too far. It was right out of the middle of the fairway. To me it was like, okay, there was a couple that happened right after the rain delay on Saturday, but there was a couple that happened before that too.
Yeah.
It's overseed, so there's some rye mixed in with that stuff at Augusta. So my guess is like, okay, there might have been just some moisture from the grass that got between the ball and the club face and caused some of that miniature flyer. Up north we called them squirters.
Right.
It was just that was a common thing in college when we play. If it was wet, the ball just squirted all over the place. And it was interesting. I had some conversations with a player over the weekend about like, okay, what are some of the things, like if that's something that's happening where like, okay, we're going to see a loss of friction, what can we start to maybe think of that's going to happen? Well, maybe your ability to work the golf ball off the grass is reduced. So if you're sitting there wanting to try to play a 30-foot draw, man, it might not happen. That was one of the kind of the things I kind of did in my playing career growing up was if the weather got bad or got wet, I literally just tried to hit the ball dead straight.
Yep.
And I remember reading an old article about Tom Watson, like why he was so good in bad weather. He got super aggressive. He's like, ball could do anything. Why would I, if the ball could possibly do something different than I'm expecting, why would I aim away from anything? And, he would just,
Right.
Take dead aim and just let it go. So then, starting to understand, okay, how's that going to affect, some things on the short game, it's just, it's just some of the interesting things that can happen out of different grasses. It's an interesting. There are some grasses I have no experience on. So like paspalum, I've never played on any of that. I don't really. I've had some people tell me some stuff about it, but I think I've played a little bit on some fescue before as well. But it's just. I wish there was a perfect answer to. Hey, I can set someone's bag up to go ahead and play everywhere. But it's just hard to do. But I really I have a specific way I kind of set people. I like people to have their wedge set up in their bag in a very dynamic manner. So meaning I want something that's going to handle soft conditions. So usually I like to put the sand wedge, 54, 56 degrees, sometimes mid to a little bit higher bounce. I like the lob wedge to be a little bit lower bounce. Because if you ask me, it's okay. Hitting it high off a tight lie. That's one of the tougher shots. So can I have a wedge that's going to help them handle that? But then you start, I get people asking me about some of these special grinds from Vokey and stuff. So the T grind is a real popular one. A lot of people see that one, they're like, oh, it's cool, it's on tour and stuff. I was like, yeah, if you're playing in South Florida, that's going to work really well there. Man, you get it. If you were to take that thing to the Midwest, you'd take divots that were 5 feet long.
It's going to be horrible. Yeah, you're going to hate it.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. So, it's always an interesting topic, and I'll admit I've had a couple fittings where I do a majority of my fittings off grass down here. Whenever possible, I'm doing it off the grass tee. We got Bermuda. We overseed with rye in the winter. I did have one guy last year. He lives up in Nashville, plays it on a little bit different grass than we play down here. What worked really well in the fitting, he got it back home and he was like, man, they just don't go through the ground the same up here. And we ended up having to switch to a little bit wider sole. I think we took him from a set of T100s actually into just a set of PXGs, a little bit wider sole. So that was kind of the answer for him. It's interesting, interesting topic for sure.
Yeah, I mean, my home course right outside my window is rye. Everything's rye. And it has this propensity to kind of put the ball up a little bit off the turf when it's growing nicely. If it grows poorly, it's just not great. But if it's growing in season, it kind of gives you a fluffy lie, and that's why we've never gotten away from it at the club. I've asked, why don't we go to Ben? And I go, well, the members, they like a fluffier lie. They like being able to get the ball in the air a little bit easier. And I understand all that, but then going to Bermuda, which, I mean, it's right on the ground from the fairway, that is a totally different type of swing I've got to make to get the proper contact instead of kind of, I'm a sweeper. I'll sweep with a little divot, but I have to kind of almost like I'm trying to hit a punch shot the first couple rounds thinking about it.
Yeah. And the funny thing is, I've never even asked you, what type of clubs do you have?
So right now I'm playing the Wilson staff model CBs.
Okay.
So I used to play the FG Tour V6s back in the day when they were out. But before making the switch, I played the MP25s. So the last couple sets have either been Mizuno or Wilson the last 5-6 years. And they're a little bit different. I like the Wilsons have a little bit deeper face, but a little bit more compact looking. I can kind of go with that style of look. But the Mizunos, I mean, I will never throw away the MP25s unless they start to break. But
in general, it's companies tend to have, and there's a couple companies, some of the companies have different models of soles, but in general, they tend to have a little bit of a philosophy about their sole design.
Yep.
They can be kind of specific. And so, kind of way I look at it, Titleist for the most part with their player irons, those are kind of thinner, more narrower sole. They do have a little pre-wear on the front of them, but the way their sole design on their player clubs works, it promotes the club to dig into the turf a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
Where then you got like ping, like the I210s, a little bit wider. Those tend to be good for someone who maybe, hits, gets it into the ground a little bit more. And then, again, on the player's side, a player's club side of things, you get someone who likes to slam that club into the ground with a lot. Man, the sole on the Strixon Z line of irons is phenomenal for that person. But you get someone who's a sweeper. That Strixon sole might not work the greatest. They might start to just strike the ball too low on the face. They'll spin it more and they'll hit it shorter. So yeah, like what you're talking about in your, that from we don't have Wilson in our lineup right now, but they're a Chicago company. I'm very familiar with them. I grew up in the 90s. My recollection of Wilson tends to be a little bit wider, a little bit kind of flat, not much camber on the sole as well. Yeah, you take that. That might not work the greatest off of the tighter, firmer turf like we have down here. Unfortunately, we can, obviously you get someone who's really good at building the golf clubs and customizing, they can put some kind of, special grind on it. There's one tour player that I've worked with before, and we've been doing his club work for him out at our headquarters for about 10 years, that essentially we've taken his Titleist irons and put almost a Strixon style sole on it. Because that makes it work through the ground really well for it. Wasn't we didn't just all of a sudden grab a Strixon like, hey, let's copy that. They just tried some different options and that happened to work for them. And then you look at it and you're like, hey, it looks very much like it's got that V-shaped sole halfway through the sole. And it worked out pretty well. Obviously starting to go down that road, dollars and cents wise for a lot of golfers out there, they might not be willing to pay the 50 to maybe $100 per club that some places are going to charge to do that type of grind on it. But, depends on, but fortunately there's a lot of variety out there. So like when I'm going through a fitting with someone, kind of my standard procedure right now is, okay, let's find out what the correct lie angle is for them at first. Because you have the greatest sole design in the world for somebody, but if they're swinging it in there and the club's 5 degrees too flat, it ain't going to make a lick of difference.
It won't matter. Yeah.
No. Find the right lie angle, square it up, see how that improves, then kind of start to analyze. Okay, what do you see visually, and what are you hearing, and then what are you able to kind of measure? Like, where is contact happening on the face with how they do it? Trying to get it within that first 4 or 5 grooves on the club face. That's always kind of my goal, whether it's an iron fitting or a wedge fitting, on a stock shot. That's where I want the strike to happen, because that's where it's kind of designed to happen. And then, okay, do they need a sole that pushes off the ground or digs into the ground to help them get there? And that can make a huge difference. That one PGA Tour player I was telling you about, he had a backup set of irons that matched the lofts and lies exactly the same. We literally tested them, and the ones with the right sole flew 8 yards further in the air.
Wow.
So it's huge getting that lined up correct, and getting that nailed down. Then obviously, you want to be able to make sure they can play, different places with it. So their delivery can make, can change things as well. I've got another tour player who doesn't lean the shaft a whole lot at impact. So he's very sensitive to sole design on the specific grass he's playing.
Yeah.
He went through 7 sets of irons. I think it was 7 sets of irons last year on the PGA Tour.
Wow.
Every time we went to a different type of grass, what he was using before didn't work very well, and had to kind of change things almost every week. It seemed like, but that's a unique case. I would say obviously not too many people are going to be that way all the time.
I mean, I would imagine most people are trying to get fit for the 80-20 rule. Like, where are you going to play most of your golf? What's that going to most look like? And then if you're in a freak situation, I mean, we go down to Orlando every year. We play 5 rounds of golf, and it's all in Bermuda, of course. And I've got a 14-degree bounce on my 56, and I also have in my repertoire one that's 10 and one that's 12. So I bring the 10 or the 12 because I want to kind of nip it a little bit more. I don't want to bounce. And then maybe I'll bring the 60 that I don't usually use because I don't really need it around my home course. And I'll stick that thing as close into the turf as I possibly can and kind of pinch it and hit it high. but maybe that's probably the most, at least for the average person, probably the most likely situation where they're going to have to come up with situational wedges on different types of grass, not as opposed to situational iron sets like you talked about with your PGA Tour player example.
Yeah, and I mean, if there's one club in the bag that I would say just have a if you're someone who you're like, hey, I'm gonna go and I want to play well and competitive golfer, and you're gonna be playing multiple types of grass, the lob wedge or the bottom wedge in the bag, having a couple options there. Because obviously, with the sand wedge, you're probably gonna be making some bigger swings. So you know, you can kind of manipulate it a little bit to get
Yeah.
it into the ground the way you need to, but you start playing those little touch ones from 40, 50 yards and in. Having that sole design and bounce and everything about that lob wedge really tied in for that is really good, because obviously, like, okay, if I've got a 14-degree bounce on a 54-degree, and I'm playing off tight Bermuda, well, that's obviously if you're playing a shot that you need to let run, that's not an issue. If you got to play a shot, you got to play high. You're probably not going to be playing that with a 54-degree anyway. It's 58 or 60 with the right type of sole. So yeah, that bottom end, that lob wedge, getting that one, it'd be great if we could all have full sets of wedges for every type of condition we're playing in, but that ain't happening.
I mean, I have a 50. I will tend to go on Bermuda, go 56 for a lot of shots I would normally hit. I'll go down to 52 because I would to pinch it. Yeah, it'll go a little bit lower, of course, but I would rather feel like I'm going to pinch it and then maybe skip it in instead of what I normally hit a moon ball and then just let it drop. I mean, it's an adjustment, but I feel more confident doing that than trying to just figure out how to hit a sand wedge for 5 days.
Yeah, and that's getting the leading edge down is ultimately kind of like what you're doing. So Aaron Valdez is the head of our tour department out at our headquarters. He doesn't ever really look at what the companies say is measured bounce. Ultimately what he's looking at is millimeters off the ground of the leading edge. So he's got a jig he'll measure the club at and say, okay, this one's this far off the ground. I mean, that's ultimately what we're looking like, because you could have an 8-degree bounce club, but you can have a sole that's foot wide on it, and it's going to be sitting quite a bit off the ground. So ultimately, it's trying to get that leading edge the appropriate amount off the ground for wherever you're playing. So that's really kind of, I think it's a great way to go about it. It's one of the ways I look at it. Unfortunately, like, not everybody's got the ability to have all that type of measurement equipment, and I don't do any building on my end, and I don't do really any grinding. I mean, I have at Scott Hamilton's indoor studio, we have some of the stuff to do that. I haven't dabbled into that. Probably something maybe that'll be my winter project, to start to learn. My problem is, like, I've ground wedges before. It's just get the really good guys know how to get the finishing work on it to make it look like it hasn't been ground.
Yeah,
mine will just come out with grind marks all over it. No, I won't polish it up. So maybe that'll be something I try to learn over the winter. But yeah, it's an art for sure. It's an art. I mean, it's and just trying to figure out how to what can you do for that player, and it's one of those things. It's like, it can be a risky one, because I think you see a lot of wedge testing on the PGA Tour. Obviously, they're week in, week out. They're significantly different grasses. I mean, they're Hilton Head this week from Augusta. It's quite a bit difference. So
right into pure Bermuda.
Yeah,
very different style. But I would think too. Then, I guess when you're trying to. I guess my next question is, when you're trying to fit an average person, let's take the tour player aside. We talked about in an earlier episode, kind of your kingpin number, your kingpin step being, it's spin loft. What is your kind of wedge fitting kingpin number? What are you looking for from a player on TrackMan to know, okay, that's probably the right wedge for them. That's probably the right combo for them.
Yeah. I tend to get one of my favorite shots to have people try to play is about 90 yard is a 90-yard carry.
Okay.
And I'm wanting to see a certain smash factor, certain launch angle, certain spin rate. And then I'll actually try to have them, I also have them hit like a 60-yard shot. And I'm also looking for certain launch angles, smash factor, spin rates there. Ideally, I'd love to have them hit 6 to 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 yards. That just takes a long time. But I found like if I can get those two carry numbers, as like my starting points, that gets me in a good spot. So at 90 yards, I'm looking for roughly 26 degrees of launch, about 1.10 on your smash factor, maybe 1.08 to 1.10 smash factor. And really, like, can I get 9,000 RPMs, 8,500 to 9,000? And then trying to get contact, in that magical first 5 grooves area. And they all, if they're not there, one of the numbers will tell me something. So maybe I'll get that launch and I'll see that smash, but then all of a sudden spin rate's only 7,000.
Mm-hmm.
That's an indicator, striking it higher on the club face. Maybe they need more bounce. And maybe even their smash might even come down a little bit lower. Because in general, like if smash lowers, I think it's a better thing that when smash lowers, spin goes up. If smash lowers and spin goes down, that it's a higher strike on the club face. It's a loss. There's just some things that are maybe not happening the way I want it to. So again, obviously that's with a premium golf ball off the ideal conditions. So that range there. Now, when it comes to the 60-yard shot, I'm looking for about 30 degrees of launch, somewhere around there, around a 1.0 smash factor, and hopefully maybe 8,000 RPMs, 8 to 9,000. I did some wedge research a couple years ago. Jason Duffner at 60 yards in a TrackMan combine test launches at about 30 and spins it at 9,600 RPMs. That's kind of like, hey, that's the dream. Go ahead and try to do that. And he does it like stupidly consistently with it.
Yeah.
So those are kind of some of the benchmark numbers that I look for on that. And so, if I'm starting to see, too high a smash factor, I'll start to look at different things. Like, how's the club being delivered? Is it draw by a swing? Is there too much, are they using too strong a loft? Usually not the case. I see people using too weak a loft for too far a distance usually at times. So those are kind of the I guess I would say the wedge kingpin numbers. I've got a little matrix card that if anybody's ever followed Scott Hamilton's social media, he's posted it up there a couple times, but it's just basically a brief little capture of my research I did on wedge play on the TrackMan combine, where I've got launch angles, spin rates, smash factors of really the major champions I looked at from 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 yards. And what do I see on that? And those are really kind of the numbers I'm trying to guide people toward in general.
If you have a bias in fitting, is it toward less bounce or more bounce? I mean, what do you kind of start someone in a particular bounce and then you think, okay, I got to bump it up, or do you go the other way? You start them too much and bring it down?
No, I wouldn't say I've got my favorite kind of wedge setup that I tell people, like, hey, this is a configuration that you can go play around the country with. And the gap wedge is the one that I will be a little bit more, I guess, specific on, depending on what I'm seeing with their delivery, with their 6-iron and a pitching wedge. If there's someone who gets the club into the ground, I'm going to go to a higher bounce gap wedge option, because I want that thing to behave on the full swings.
Yeah.
Because yes, you do get some players that are taking a gap wedge and hitting some like 90-yard shots, but really the gap wedge for a lot of players, it's a full swing club, and then they're chipping with it.
Really?
Oh yeah.
People...
they'll do little bump and runs around the green.
Oh, okay.
It's a ball back in the stance. It's like, okay, well, if you're shoving the ball back in your stance, bounce doesn't really matter, because I measured it one time, but to take 8 degrees of bounce off of a 35-inch wedge, you'd be surprised how little you have to move it to do that. It's not much to take that much bounce off it. So I try to get the gap wedge even to the point where like, hey, the shaft and the gap wedge should match the irons because it's a little bit more of a full swing club. Now on the sand wedge and the lob wedge, so if we're talking in Vokey terms, in their gap wedge in the 50 and 52 degree, they have a F grind, 8-degree bounce, 12-degree bounce. And so one of those two is usually, if there's someone who tends to get the club into the ground, they're going to the 12-degree bounce. The F grind, 14-degree bounce in the sand wedge, they're not a type of player that's ever going to open that club up, though. Usually that thing is squared up, or if they're in soft sand, they'll open up, but they're never going to really kind of open it up off of grass. Right. So I'll do that one. Sometimes the D grind. The D grind is actually a great thing that they came out with. 12 degrees bounce, very similar sole and shape and everything to the M grind. It's a really cool one. Obviously, they make that all the way down into 60 as well. So, yeah, S grind, M grind, very, very much a kind of a starting point. That's what I'll base a lot of stuff off what I see there. And then I've sat there and I've tried to do what measuring I can and see what the specs are and what everybody else has to offer and know what matches up well with those. Like 54 S grind and Vokey is very comparable to the 54 mid bounce in the new Clevelands. And so there's enough similarities there that you can start to learn how to pick them from there. So yeah, there's options.
And then are you two questions come from that? I'll start with the first one. Well, so many sets now, especially Game Improvement, have the gap wedge that comes with it. Are you a proponent of the gap wedge with the iron set, or do you want to chuck that out the window and put them in like a 48-degree wedge that more classical wedge?
Yeah, that's always a conversation point I have with people. Obviously for your higher handicap players, it's usually, hey, let's make it as forgiving as possible. Let's match it up with the irons. When we start getting into that mid handicapper, 12, 15 or something, a little bit lower, especially and get into the single digit handicappers, you're like, okay, talk to me a little bit more about what you do with a gap wedge. Is it predominantly full swing club, or do you see yourself playing 3/4 shots with it?
Yeah.
And so if they say, yeah, I do play some 3/4 shots with it. I was like, okay, well, really kind of key there is you don't want that ball coming off smoking hot when you're trying to hit a 3/4 one. So I was like, full swing wise, we can get it to perform just like a gap wedge that would match the irons. I was like, but when we want to go to hitting those partial shots, let's take some of the responsiveness of the face out of it. And the trick is, can we slow the golf ball down? The better the golfer you become, the better you become at slowing the golf ball down and stopping it where you want to. So that's kind of the question I start to ask is like, okay, that where you're going? Is that where you're at? Then we, and even to a certain point where like, you get some like really low digit professional golfers. All right, your pitching wedge is also going to become a Vokey. You're going to go to a traditional blade wedge that way. You see a lot on tour. So, but yeah, as the player wants to get a little bit more precise and open up the options that they have wedge play wise in that mid range between, with the gap wedge or even the pitching wedge, switching to a traditional wedge shape is, that's definitely a conversation point I have with a lot of people.
And then are you a 4-degree gap guy? Are you a
4 to 6?
What is your view of that?
As it comes down to what's the pitching wedge coming out to? And where are we going to have it? So if someone's a T100S iron player from Titleist, 44-degree pitching wedge.
Right.
All right. So do we need to go, now if we're trying to stretch that all the way out to 60, they want a 60-degree in the bottom end of the bag. Okay. How are we going to spread out that 16 degrees?
Yeah.
So do we, I still get a lot of people, coming in because they grew up with, hey, a 52-degree gap wedge. Well, your pitching wedge is 45. That's that's 7. So transitioning a lot of people from 50. And I had to do it. I just did it a couple of years ago where I was trying to manage a 6-degree gap between a 48-degree pitching wedge and a 56-degree. I was like, I had 52, but where my pitching wedge was, I had a big gap there. It was 45 and 52, so 7-degree gap there. So yeah, so I 2 years ago, or I guess, as I went to 54, 58, I kept my 60. Because that's the loft and everything I've been happy with. So in general, I'm a 4 to 5 degree guy. The only time I don't mind a 6-degree gap is between like a 54 and a 60.
Yeah.
I get it though. There's some sets out there they're going to force you into a 48-degree gap wedge,
Right.
and then maybe you go to 54-degree sand wedge, and then a 60-degree lob wedge. So that's actually one of the Vokey has a sheet that kind of says if pitching wedge is here, here's some options to look at as far as how you set up the wedges. So I'm open to that. I try to get good balance. It's kind of one of my overall goals with everything in fitting is can I get good balance in the bag? That the player doesn't have to make some weird compensations to make up for something.
Yeah, I mean with the Mizunos, and I love them to death, but I had a 44-degree pitching wedge, and then my first wedge is 52 degrees. So I'm trying to hit a shot 125 to 130. Okay, I'm going to hit the pitching wedge. Then I got to get somehow to fit 100 yards with the 52 full swing. So yeah. I've been managing 25, 30 yards, and the home course I play, I hit a lot of wedge shots. So there were a lot of times where well, I got to kind of hit a 75% pitching wedge, 115, and maybe fan it a little bit, get it in the air, and add some stuff, like mess with it a little bit. That with the Wilson set though, there is a gap wedge, and that all it is a 100 to 105 yard club. It's full swings. That's all it is. It's all it needs to be, and that's why I asked that question about you go with what's provided, or do you kind of go into that classical wedge and go get into that family a little bit deeper. But again, I only do this to do one specific thing, and that thing only. I'm not going to chip with it. I don't want to look at it unless the shot is 105 yards and maybe 100 yards, and that's it.
Yeah. It's there's obviously tons of things you can do. And I'll still get the strange one guy come in, like he's got 45-degree pitching wedge, and the only wedge he has besides that is like a 56-degree. He's like, I grew up that way, and he's okay. He's like a +2 handicap, and I'm like, rock on, man. That's awesome.
You do you.
It's there's VJ Trolio is an instructor over in West Point, Mississippi, over near Starkville at Mossy Oak and Old Waverly. Phenomenal guy. I'm on one of the best guys I've ever met in the industry. And but he's got a rule, and I can't remember what age it goes away. But if you're a junior golfer with him, you can't use anything above a 56-degree. He won't work with you if you put something above that in your bag. Because there's obviously Seve never had anything above 55-degree.
Right.
Tom Kite was the first person to win a major with a 60-degree in the bag. So obviously the ball has changed and it's probably required some things with that because it's obviously not spinning as much. You can still make it spin, but yeah, there's obviously an art to that as well. Yeah, from a fitting standpoint, I like to try to figure out, okay, gap wedge, what's the bounce need to be there to kind of give us the full swing gapping that we want to see. The sand wedge, does that sole work really well in soft conditions and when the person's squared up for a 70 to 100-yard shot? And then is this 60 something very, the lob wedge, is that something very dynamic that allows them to have multiple types of setups, and not inhibit their setup? There's one particular shot that when I work with a better player, or really any player, at Cartersville on one side of our practice area, we've got where I kind of call it Scott Hamilton's side. He's got his little tee box next to his teaching bay. There's a little slope on the back of it. And there's a small little putting green it's actually the nursery green for the golf course, but they keep it in really good shape, and it's a perfect little pitching green. It's maybe 20 feet deep, 20 feet wide. It's like a perfect little circle. But back edge of this box is where a lot of people walk off, carts drive by it. So you get this really cool situation where the grass kind of year round is tight,
yeah,
firm, It's downhill and slightly above your feet if you're a right-handed golfer. So you've got the downhill, you've got the tightness, you've got the side hill, 3 things that make that ball speed up. And that's it. That's something that's going to make the golf ball go faster in those situations. And I like to put people on that. And it's like, all right, show me how you're going to hit this shot. And I'll typically see people, who maybe started off with a lob wedge that matched their irons. But typically, wide sole, a lot of bounce. It's just a really high lofted pitching wedge that they have, not very dynamic. And so what do I see when I put them in that situation? And this, any golfer can sit there and look at this like, okay, I'm going to try to land this on the green. I've got to get it high. We can't send this thing in, low without any spin.
Right.
But you'll see that they'll have forced themselves because of the lob wedge that they had. You'll see like, okay, I put them in that situation. What do? Move the ball back in their stance. Lean the shaft forward. It was like, all right, now you just added 2 more things that are going to make that ball come out faster.
Hotter. Yep.
And on top of the fact that the ground is, you're downhill and a ball above your feet. And when I also have the tour players I work with come over and hit that shot as well. And I see a totally different setup because they've got a wedge that allows for it. They kind of play it more middle of their stance, open face, and they return it with as little shaft lean as possible.
Club just a little bit.
Club just glides off the ground. The cool thing is like half the shots will come off low with a shit ton of spin. Half the shots will come off high floaters. They both land in the same spot and they run out about the same amount. And I'm
way better than the rest of us.
Yeah, but it's like where they're actually using technology and club design to their advantage. Like now they've got the ability to they've got margin for error for that ball to end up actually doing ball's going to end up in roughly in the right area where they want it, with bunch of different possible outcomes with it as far as how the ball is launching and spinning. So that's like usually the last after I kind of put someone through, like, all right, this is where I kind of want to set. Now go try this shot. And then I'll kind of show them the technique and the setup to it, and it's pretty cool when you see them like realize like, okay, the club actually helps them do it, and achieve that, and then also next thing you know, they're getting more confident with it, and you can just see the light bulbs going off. So that's, I know, kind of a little bit of a tangent, but it's just kind of a cool little side story on it. What was your take on the Masters overall?
Very happy for Hideki. With so much going on in this country around Asian Americans and Pacific Islander and poor treatment of them, hate crimes. I think it was powerful to have not only Hideki win the Masters, but Subhasha Kajitani win the women's AM for Japan as well, pull off the double. I think that's cool. Will Zalatoris, man. He's going to get his. I don't know when that day is going to be, but it's going to be very soon.
It's crazy. So like, I was listening to another podcast, shout out to the guys from Shotgun Start. They cover some really topics in a really cool way. And Andy is just a trip, but he was mentioning, he's like, you got someone who's, if Will's points counted, he would be in the top 15 on the FedEx Cup.
Yep. He
is, I haven't seen the official numbers, but he's basically on the Ryder Cup team.
Yeah, if he wants it.
And Stricker, put out a couple quotes today. He's like, yeah, I'm watching him. He's top 50 in the world. And the sheer fact that, he's not, he's in a position right now, he's got to win in order to make the FedEx Cup playoffs is an absolute joke. He's finished top 6 in 2 majors in the last 6 months.
Yeah.
He's played the Players Championship. I mean, he's like, it's a different world now, and I understand like it's not to bag on anybody, but obviously those guys on the Shotgun Start, they like to pick on a couple people. They're like, Will could not get into an event right now because he has to rely on sponsors exemptions. There could be a sponsor that says, nope, I don't want him in the field. I want JJ Henry in the field.
Yep.
Honestly, who's going to bring more attention? It's
right.
It's one of those cases like, typically in professional golf, you can sit there and just say to somebody, play better, and you'll get your spot. Well, Will is playing fantastically, and he can't get a spot. Like,
Yeah.
It's just real frustrating to see. But like to your points on Hideki, yeah, everything that's happening with the incidents with Asian Americans, that the incident that happened a month or so ago, where the crazy guy here in Atlanta, shot up a couple of nail parlors. That's literally less than 10 miles from my home. And so that's obviously significant. On the Japanese side of things is really sensitive to me because I was living in Tokyo in 2011 when that massive earthquake hit and destroyed Fukushima and Sendai, and that's where Hideki's from. That's where he lives.
Yeah.
So if people think Michael Jordan was a big star athlete in the United States in the 90s, they have no idea how Hideki, he may as well just they might just make him the emperor. He is. It's hard to even explain. I lived in Tokyo in 2011 at kind of the peak of the Ryo Ishikawa days.
Mm-hmm.
The kid was 19 years old. He has cardboard cutouts just plastered across this city, and he didn't win the Masters. He didn't win in the States.
Yeah.
And Hideki he is obviously just an extremely humble, genuine guy. It is. I still have a ton of friends that live in Tokyo that I still talk to, not as frequently as I'd like to, but I still have a lot of friends over there. Everything that they've had to go through, especially in that Sendai area, it's unreal because there's so much a part of that area that's never going to go back to normal, not for a couple 100,000 years. And just to see that, to have a little glimmer of hope of some good things happening, man, I hope. If there's one thing left in the golf world that I want to see this year is Hideki carrying the torch, wearing the green jacket into the opening ceremonies, because that's just going to be. I hope Augusta National allows him to do that. I think he can, because he gets to wear that
wherever
he wants to for the next year. I really hope he gets to. That's something we get to see happen, because he is. Funny thing is, like, he must have a huge security detail right now, because you're not seeing much about him like being out and about in Tokyo at all.
Yeah.
Because like he's actually, like, you can't tell, he's extremely private. He's very
much so. Yeah.
Nobody really. I don't think anybody knows if they've ever seen a picture of his wife. Like, it's that tightly guarded. But yeah, just so cool to watch. I've had funny people say, like, oh, I wish I would have had a little bit more drama. For me, there's one of two things I'd like to see at the Masters: a lot of back nine action, a lot of drama. It's really tight. Tiger 19. A lot of things that could have happened.
Yeah.
Or someone who's just saying, you know what, the back nine on Sunday is not going to matter. Just taking control of it. I remember hearing a long time ago where Tiger talked about, like, in general, what maybe his philosophy going into a tournament was. He's like, 1 or 2 under par every 9 holes, and then I want to have a 9-hole stretch where I pull myself away from the field. And that's what Hideki did on the back nine on Saturday. Man, it was just so many good shots, so many smart shots. Feel bad for anybody. I feel bad for Xander. I think he's getting, some people are dragging him for the shot he hit on 16. You listen to, like, you watch him hit the shot, you see his reaction while the ball's in the air. He hit it exactly the way he wanted to. And he talked about it in his interview afterwards. He's like, it was exactly the shot I wanted to. He's like, I just haven't played there enough to know if that was the right shot or not. It was one of those cases he did everything within his power to pull it off. He still played great, obviously. And I wish I honestly hope more junior golfers out there watched how Xander reacted to that, because he's got that SoCal cool kind of vibe to him, and I think it's just a great way for a long. That's not going to haunt him.
I think he's going to win the U.S. Open.
Yeah, it's week in, week out at big tournaments. It's like he's there.
He's there a lot. Eventually you win one of those when you're there that often, I think.
Yeah, he's won East Lake officially once, unofficially twice. And East Lake, man, that being able to play well there, when that place is firm and fast. You talk about, like, extreme turf conditions. I played Eastlake the day after Thanksgiving in 2015. Everyone sees it on Tour Championship where it's nice and greened out and everything. But the day I played it, the greens were green. Everything else was brown, firm, and fast. It was awesome. That was like that was my favorite playing conditions I've ever been in. But Eastlake, that's the type of course that honestly that one would say like that's a golf course that I think would say if you can play well there, you can do really well at US Open.
Yeah.
Because you cannot drive it bad at Eastlake.
Got to keep it in play. You got to hit greens. You got to give yourself chances. Don't put big numbers on the board. But those things play there.
Yeah, there's not a lot of short par fours there, but there's a couple where if you're in the first cut of rough, like you're looking middle of the green, front edge. What's that number to that? And you're hoping that you keep it on the back edge.
Yep.
From 100 yards. So yeah. But yeah, it's I thought it was a great tournament. It did what a major should do. It showed who the best players are, who's controlling the ball the best, who can maintain it over a period of time. And Hideki just didn't look, but yeah, he looked pretty unflappable.
Did.
Yeah, that was fun to watch. That's for sure.
Well, it gave us a great conversation piece for. Well, we got into wedges, but it was great. I enjoyed talking about wedges, and hopefully everybody else listening did too. Next week, we'll come back with some more. We'll figure out the topic probably about 5 minutes ahead of time, which we normally do. And then we'll have a great time with it. So, Pete, thanks as always.
My pleasure, man. Pleasure being here.
Always a blast. And then if you are a listener to the show on podcast, please give us a review on Apple Podcasts. It helps the show. Or do it on Google Podcasts, which is apparently very popular. Now, that also helps the show. Shoot us a note. You can email me, ryan@thegolfnewsnet.com. You can hit us up both on Instagram, Cool Clubs, ATL, and Ryan Ballingy. I'm on Twitter, at my name, Ryan Ballingy. Probably the easiest way to find me as well. So thanks so much for listening. And we will see you next time, or talk to you next time, on Gear Effects.
Have a great night, everyone.